guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to the Faculty of International Relations FIR Annual Conference 2025. Every year, this event offers us a moment to pause, reflect, and share perspectives on the major issues shaping our world. And this year's theme could hardly be more relevant. We meet at a time when the geopolitical and economic landscape is changing faster than ever, creating both serious challenges and new opportunities for Europe, for the European Union, and for Czechia. Our first panel will address the political and security dimension, how evolving power relations are reshaping Europe's position, its resilience, and the role of NATO and EU defense integration. The second panel will turn to the economic perspective, looking at how global turbulence, instability, and unpredictability affect investment, competitiveness, and strategic priorities, both at the EU and national level. At the Faculty of International Relations, we believe that universities play a crucial role in society, not only by educating future professionals and leaders, but also by contributing to public debate, promoting critical thinking, and connecting academic knowledge with real-world challenges. Though events like this conference will aim to create a space for dialogue between scholars, policymakers, business representatives, and students, I am proud that we are very active, and not only through this event, but also through many other activities we provide our expertise and shape the public debates. Before we begin, let me express my sincere thanks to our partners, the representation of the European Commission in Czechia and Hospodářské noviny, is there any representative of them, for their valuable support and cooperation in making this event possible. Thank you once again for joining us today. I wish you an engaging and inspiring evening full of new ideas and meaningful discussions. Thank you, Jaro, for preparing this speech. So, thank you very much.
Okay. Once again, thank you to our dean for the opening remarks, and also I would like to invite Monika Ladmanová, the head of the European Commission's representation here in Czechia, to also give us a welcome remarks, please.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Dean, dear friends and colleagues. Thank you to the faculty, first of all, for organizing this event, because we are meeting here today in a very challenging and turbulent times. Madam Dean already mentioned it. The changes which are happening around us are the fastest we experienced in decades, and the power order is being restructured, the alliances are being tested, the new technologies are reshaping the way the world is ruled. And it is not only about who is ruling the world, but it's also about how the governance is being exercised. And this scares us. So where is Europe in this all? So Europe is in a fight. Europe is in a fight for its future, for its destiny, for its independence, for the democratic values it stands for. And today I think that we will be able to discuss in a more depth what we as individuals, what we as a community, what we as the academic sector or private or non-profit sector can do to ensure that we survive this fight, and that the resilience, which I truly believe we still have as Europe, can prevail, and that the democracy will prevail. So I have only short speech, but at the end of every presentation these days I always say, long live Europe. So thank you, and let's discuss together.
Once again, thank you very much for the opening remarks. I was not the author of the second one. but I have a great pleasure to chair the first panel of this event, which is titled Geopolitics and Changing World Order, Who and What Will Rule. I have the privilege to be the moderator of this, again, very, or actually excellent lineup. As we agreed in the panel, we will try to frame the recent developments that have been already touched upon by the Dean and also by Monika Ladmanova. Try to understand what are the perceptions and what are the perspectives also on the ground from coming from the EU, as it was already mentioned, but also the member states, and also looking from the Czech perspective, which I think is also very important. So I think there is a lot on the plate that we have. We only have approximately 1 hour, so I will not be speaking too long. But let me, at the very beginning, to introduce our panelists. So on my left, we have Jaroslav Weinfurter, who is a researcher here at the Faculty of the International Relations. He's actually focusing on international relations in his research focus. Monika Ladmanova, who is the head of the European Commission representation here in the country. Oton Anastasakis, who is this week visiting professor here at the faculty, but also director at the European Studies Center at the University of Oxford. And last but not least, Veronika Jelinkova, who is the Chief of Staff to the Director General at the Ministry of Defense, also very experienced. She also served at the Czech representation of NATO in Brussels. So for the beginning, I would like to ask Jaroslav to provide us a little bit, let's say, I would say, broader perspective and understanding the very turbulent developments that we've been facing in the last couple of years, because also I think not only from the academic perspective, but also, let's say, the developments that follow, I think we are really facing a major change. And the stability that we've been enjoying last couple of decades seems that we got very easily used to, right? But the challenges that we face really seems to be critical in understanding where we are, what we want, and how we can prevail. And then we will be touching later on the more concrete elements. Sure. So, Jaroslav, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And I completely agree with the complexity of the problem, because this is not just a practical problem for policymakers in Europe and outside of Europe, but it's also an intellectual problem, because the situation is quite complex, quite messy, and we live in an age of ordered chaos. My job, as we agreed, is to kind of provide more of an academic framework, maybe language, maybe a bit of terminology, but that could help us make sense of the times and the era we're going through. And the classical way to do this would be to do it through the language of multipolarity. Basically, everyone in the field would now agree that we have moved from a multipolar order with global liberal governance. We're heading towards multipolarity. That is an international order with different and a multitude centers of power. This is the stuff that we teach to the first-year students. The story would be that we're heading into a world order that's dominated by at least 3 power centers: the United States, China, Russia, with possible additions of other great powers or regional powers. So what we have here is basically a 3-body problem, or 3+ body problem, to try and figure out how these power centers, including their orbits and their spheres of influence, how they interact with one another, and how complex and unpredictable those situations are. If we want to be a bit fancy about this, we can portray this in terms of cosmology. That this is not just clash of great powers, but also clash of worldviews, clash of worlds, clash of universes, clash of rule-based systems. Pax Americana clashing with the Pax Sinica, clashing with the Pax Russica or Ruský mír. So we may be entering not just a world of multipolarity, but also this kind of multiverse or pluriverse, a world of many worlds. The assumption would be that given the fact that the international order has always been, for most part of its history, multipolar, then that we're actually entering well-trodden grounds, well-known things that we in international relations know how to deal with this, how to study this. And the truth is that we don't. The truth is that we're entering a completely new territory because it's for the first time in human history that we're entering a world of multipolarity with modern-day institutions, with institutions of supranational governance, with non-state actors, with diffused and decentered governance. So if not multipolarity, then what? And in international relations, in the past few years, there's been a debate revolving around this awfully sounding term, polycentrism. I know, I see your reactions. It's not a good word. It doesn't roll off the tongue easily. But it's based on the assumption that contemporary international order is based around a multitude of centers of governance revolving around different areas of competency. That there's this almost a division of labor with regard to governance and authority into specialized and narrowly defined issue areas. Some actors are more geared towards security, other actors are more geared towards producing an economic functioning as an economic hub. Other actors are preoccupied with international norms. Silicon Valley and tech companies provide the kind of a technological background and innovation. So we live in a world, we genuinely live in a polycentric world with diffuse governance, diffuse authority, and therefore diffused power. So the question about who's going to govern Europe, who's going to govern the world, which state is going to come out of the top, in a world this complex with diffuse authority, this kind of question doesn't really make sense, or it becomes very difficult to genuinely answer. Power should be viewed as a kind of a momentary constellation of these overlapping institutions and the way in which they either reinforce their effects or kind of cancel each other out. And I know that we will be focusing mostly on Europe, on Czech Republic, but if I were to take a larger perspective, we have the tendency to hear these horror stories about the breakup of the global liberal order and how bad that's going to be. And yes, it's for us in Europe and for us in the West, it's not a good news. However, that being said, there are countries in the global South for whom this doesn't sound as bad, who are actually quite keen to take up these new opportunities and take opportunities of the fact that there's no longer just one game in town, that there are different centers of authority, different potential clients, different potential sources of finance, economic opportunities, political opportunities. But this comes at the price of this almost withering away of the kinds of structures and the kinds of rules that we've been used to for the past decades. So there are more implications that I could derive from this, but we best leave it for the debate. I don't want to hog too much time, and so I pass the word on to my colleagues.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I think this was an amazing sort of a frame for the recent developments and where we are in terms of the complexity. And I think it raises a question, obviously, where we are when it comes to the EU, right? Because obviously the European integration project has been evolving through the decades with its pros, with its cons. But talking about its power, it is, I would say, a very strong actor. For the perspective, we would talk about it. But obviously, some say, and also from the academic perspective, that Europe or the EU is acting only when there is a crisis. There is this unity that is really pushing the European project go further. it might be the next question, but I would go back and sort of follow up on what Jaroslav raised and try to also frame it to the, let's say, to the EU. So where is the EU when it comes to the complexity? What we have achieved, and where is still something that we really can rely on? Because as it was already mentioned, the unity is being tested, and when it comes to the EU, is not the EU, is the member states.
Thank you for reminding, especially in the Czech context, that EU is about member states, because here in Czech Republic very often we hear that EU is something different, and then Czech Republic is somehow only consuming what is imposed on it. So no, Czech Republic and every single member state out of 27 is part of the decision making and is shaping the agenda, policy, future, etc. So, as I've mentioned, Europe is in the fight, and it depends on its member states, how far they are able to go to make sure that we keep what we established, because I am truly convinced that the whole European Union project is a little miracle that we managed for 70 years plus minus to have something so functioning, operational, where there are no weapons against each other, but it's rather the diplomacy and words and compromises which matters for everybody. And when we are talking about now the new world order and who is ruling for the European Union, it's not one single ruler, it's the community of states which is ruling. It's quite difficult, it's quite complicated, it is complex per se, only the way how the decision is made at the European level. But so far we didn't figure out anything better, and this whole, I would say, bureaucracy which is behind it and which is frustrating so many, including me, it's something what is necessary to ensure that the decision is democratic. So there is now an ongoing discussion how to simplify the rules within the European Union to ensure that we can be more flexible as a structure, and at the same time to ensure that there is not this phenomenon called gold plating. I'm sure that you came across it, because what we learned within past decade, that the rules which are meant to harmonize legislation and processes and the measures which are introduced at the European level to ensure that there is a level playing field for everybody, it's sometimes rather complicating the situation, and it's a burden for example, single market, which is still not completed, or for the four freedoms in which the European Union is based, the free move of capital, free move of persons, services. So Europe is now looking introspectively into its own processes, how it can be more simplified, to be more flexible. And at the same time, it is looking into its competitiveness to ensure that economically it is going to survive the competition with others. And there is a very new agenda for European Union as such, and this is defense and security, because Europe, as you all know, has been a project based on peace and prosperity. And in order to secure peace, we need to be prepared for the war. So there are very new agendas on the table, which are being discussed among the leaders. And let's see how much of willingness on the side of decision makers, this to be leaders of member states, are willing to maybe give away to ensure that Europe survives. The good news is, as you've mentioned, Jaro, that Europe survives on crisis and it comes out stronger and more integrated. So this is yet another crisis which might end up in a more stronger, more resilient Europe. And so there is always a hope. And let's remind ourselves, you might remember, I remember the whole COVID crisis. And let me remind ourselves that in the area of public health, European Union is not having competencies according to the Treaty of the EU. It is not an area where the member states were willing to give in to the European project, because they said, no, this is our sanctioned area, we will take care about health ourselves. But when it came to the pandemic situation, member states said, oh no, we are not able to deal with this on our own. Please, the others, let's get together and let's give the competencies to the higher structure, how to call it. And the European Commission has been entitled and legitimized to act. And you know what happened. The vaccines have been produced. First, there was a research paid by the EU for vaccines. Then the vaccines were produced, deployed, and disseminated. Also, the other health material has been jointly procured, etc., etc. So it was yet another evidence that together we are stronger.
Thank you, Monica, for raising also, I think, very exciting elements, and particularly looking from the dynamics within the EU and what it actually needs, because I think we would all agree that the EU cannot deliver if it doesn't have enough competencies, enough powers, right? And I think the COVID-19 pandemic is an absolutely great example on showing what is actually needed, right? And then it comes to the dilemma, how to proceed and how to adjust to the rapidly changing environment that requires more common actions than ever before. And this is, I would say, a very good point, which perhaps we can later touch upon. But talking about what I mentioned, the EU is about member states. It's also about member states and those, I would say, the engines of the integration. And I asked Otton to provide us a little bit more on the perspective, I would say, the traditional, very strong centers of the integration process, and looking perhaps on France, looking at Germany, because I think these are, and it's not only these examples, we can further discuss also other member states, because those are shaping the policies, and without their commitment and without their willingness, obviously their action cannot be delivered. So how do you read what's been already raised about the complexity of the world and the action ability, if I can say so, of the EU?
Thank you, Yaro. Thank you, Dean and Vice Dean, for inviting me here and to participate in this panel as well. It's ironic that you're asking a citizen of a non-member state, a Brexit country,
don't forget that you have double citizenship.
Talking about the member states, but I will be using my Greek citizenship to respond to this. So I'm safe either way. You see this. Now, let me start with something that we've been discussing in this class that I had this year. Some of the students are here, and I'm grateful that they came to listen as well, because we've been discussing a lot about the EU as an external actor. And when I asked them this morning, what is the phone number that you call the EU when you want something about foreign policy? And I had exactly the answers that I was expecting. Some said the big member states, others said Ursula von der Leyen. Angela Merkel was the name that was during the Eurozone crisis. Others said Macron, and others said Kaja Kallas. So it kind of shows that multifacial kind of often confusing picture of the European Union. That confusing picture is also strengthened, I think, by the fact that in the two most important wars in the neighborhood, we had completely different reactions. In the sense that with Ukraine, we have a much more unified reaction of the European Union. We have, obviously, there were some objections, but there is a series of actions, financial, humanitarian, migration-related, and defense, of course. And all of this have been the response to Russia. We look at Gaza, and there we see, may I say, complete chaos. We also see inaction, and this is where we also see member states basically confusing us because they all have different kind of approaches to the topic. Even within societies themselves, they were so polarized that it was impossible to get a picture of what the EU is all about. So let me go on to the member states, because these are very important. They are the components and the constituents kind of members and parts of the European Union to see 5 categories, I would say, and very, very briefly discuss them. It's the Franco-German regeneration. I mean, as you said, it used to be the engine, then it fell a little bit flat during the last 5, 7, 8 years. Now it's kind of coming back. There's a Polish ascendancy, so a very, very important role for Poland. There's the power of the small states, and I'm referring to the Baltics, but also how other small states like Greece or Cyprus might have an influence in this overall context. There's an EU-UK rapprochement. And finally, there are spoilers. You know who I'm talking about. I will explain all this very, very briefly. Now, the Franco-German regeneration is a very, very important and significant development because the 2 big countries were looking in different directions the last few years. So it's very good that they have put their act together in order to be able to work not just in the defense sphere, where they have the common enemy, and they do agree that the enemy is Russia, but also a common economic agenda as well, with which to work on issues of energy or AI, digital economy, labor markets, and so on and so forth. So there is a strategic outlook for both of these places that they do see kind of, eye to eye in some of these issues. And at the same time, of course, there are some frictions as well in terms of how they are defining their strategy vis-à-vis transatlanticism, for instance. Macron is much more in France on the strategic autonomy of the European Union. Germany is more about the transatlantic orientation and the inclusion of the United States as well in this security architecture. But overall, we are seeing that the 2 are bringing together their resources in order to be able to have a common understanding and a common action. To what extent this is going to be the engine of the European Union in this field and in other fields, I highly doubt it, because now they are playing in a much more complex EU context, where there are other countries as well that have a significance, and also because the center of gravitas is also going towards the east as a result of Russia. I am focusing the discussion on geopolitics more and security, because that's what is more relevant to my points here. Poland is a very important country. It is becoming a very important country. From the periphery of the European Union that it was as a new member state, it becomes very, very central. It did go through a period of rule of law problems, as we know, and an outlier in this European Union. But now it is becoming very prominent in security matters and the defense architecture by being the country that spent the most in terms of defense. Procurement refers to a big variety of armaments that Poland is organizing. And it is also a country that is very much affecting the strategic outlook by being a frontline state and being confronted by Russia, but also the past of Poland is a history of a Russian aggression. So it's a country that is very much into this kind of sphere, but also is very transatlantic in that it wants to have a good relationship with the United States and very much looking into the NATO context. That puts, obviously, Poland into a little bit of a disagreement with France that looks for the strategic autonomy. The third point is, what about the smaller states? It's obviously good that we have a foreign minister that comes from Estonia, but it also has to be acknowledged that all 3 Baltic states have been particularly adamant, even before the other EU countries, or rather to say it was very difficult to wake up all the other states when Russia was becoming a real danger to Europe, while Germany was continuing to cooperate and had partnerships after Crimea. These three Baltic states were actually shouting, but not many were listening. It had to be the 2022 attack and aggressive invasion in Ukraine in order for everybody to kind of think in a different, similar way. So we have those three Baltic states which are really a border that really matter, and they also affect and influence the strategic orientation of the European Union. Let me turn to another couple of small states, which is Greece and Cyprus, because the Eastern Mediterranean as well is another neighborhood of the European Union, and these two countries are trying to also bring the attention to the risks in that particular part, but of course, because of this inaction and not exactly knowing how to navigate in this area, the EU is not particularly effective in that part. There is, though, something that really disturbs these two states, the fact that the EU wants to have Turkey within the defense architecture of Europe, especially now that the United States and Trump wants to withdraw as much as possible. Turkey becomes more significant, which is not a very pleasant thing for Cyprus and Greece to hear. The fourth is EU and UK rapprochement. This is something that I'm living on a daily basis, and I am seeing a very big difference after many years of traumatic Brexit for the UK and so much drama happening at governmental level, and also a negative impact of Brexit on the UK economy. The Labour government now is trying to build back, trying to have a rapprochement with the EU. There's already been various meetings in terms of acting together in a defense matter. There have also been bilateral meetings with the French and the Germans. There's also been an agreement on fisheries, as the two are fighting over who's going to fish where. And then there's also the return to the scientific and educational programs of the European Union. There are some trade deals, and finally there is the understanding from a UK perspective that Brexit hasn't worked positively, and they need, or rather it has influenced very negatively Britain. And now they are trying to see how they're going to be again a part of Europe. It has helped that security dimension. And finally, the spoilers. The spoilers are countries that are constantly objecting in this common understanding that Russia is a real threat. I'm referring to Hungary, and I'm referring to Slovakia. Both of them, they're building their close relations with Putin. Both of them have their own kind of interests. It's a struggle for the European Union to bring them back in the kind of the common fold, but this is very much also putting the European Union in this kind of questioning as to whether there needs to be this institutional kind of reform in order to be able to do something with the veto. I was telling my students also for the toilet diplomacy that they had to send Orban to the toilet in order to be able to reach a common decision in one of the European summits. So what we are seeing effectively is an environment of transition. Transition, of course, is something that happens all the time, but this particular period, with the withdrawal of the United States from this defense architecture of Europe, there is a period of time that the EU needs to try and catch up with its own kind of power in this security game, and that is maybe a very, very crucial kind of time. Because we know what the end game is or should be, but how you reach there is a very, very crucial and vulnerable period in many ways. That's all for me.
Awesome, thank you very much. This was another, I would say, very inspiring contribution to this debate and covering the dynamics not only in the EU but also in the surrounding areas and how they're actually driving it, what are the interests, right? And how we can really derive something that can serve as a common interest. But let's lead us to this element we still haven't had a chance to cover, and this is the Czech perspective, obviously. So and we have here Veronika Jelinková from the Ministry of Defense talking about the complexity that was already mentioned, the pressures that the EU is being exposed, and also the NATO and its capacity and its willingness to act and how to act. Also, you know, following up what Otto mentioned with the dynamics. How do you read what has changed, and how, where in this regard, what role Czechia is actually playing?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I would put it on the perspective of NATO and Czechia altogether. I don't know what to say because you said mostly everything, but and it was perfect. So I will continue a little like time shape what happened actually in the last years. I don't know if you remember correctly, but in 2019, President Macron actually said that NATO is brain dead. Back then, we were, as alliance, I think, also trying to find our way in the geopolitics and international relations. We were also covering more, I don't want to put it like that, but like softer topics under the Biden administration. We were covering also climate change and security. That was awesome. And then when President Trump came, it all get back in the background. But in 2020 and 2021, the COVID pandemic happened, and it ended everything. You know, like it was hard for us because, you know, we need to work with like secret information, and it was really hard for us to work properly. But the alliance was also working to help with the pandemics, and I don't know if you also remember this. In 2020, it's actually 5 years ago today, like next week, NATO was providing ventilators to Czech Republic during the pandemic. That was a big thing happening. We need to act fast. We need to act when borders were closed. We didn't know how to do all the paperwork. It was something that we're learning us actually things that we are using also today. Then in 2022, the war in Ukraine started after the pandemic, and I remember that we held the summit of the leaders in just one day. It was something that was never happened before, and actually, thanks to the COVID pandemic, we were able to do that because we did it like virtually. So that was something that was also changing the whole perspective, how we were working. Then I still remember that I think it was in April or May when the Finnish and Swedish defense directors came to our office, and they were telling us we're joining. And we were sitting there and we were like, this is a historical moment. This is something that nobody was expecting in any case. Of course, for Sweden, the road was a bit longer than for Finland, but that's something that really changed the whole geopolitics back then. And then I have to say we were heard for the, I don't want to say first time, but after many years, I think the Eastern allies were really heard in the alliance. Because, and for Czechia, I have to be honest with this, we were just like, you know, on a train ride. We were just happy to be in NATO and just like don't be so loud and we didn't do many things back then. And I'm sorry to everybody, but I just want to like state this. But after that, we were heard and we were listened, and we have a good name. And after the Czech ammunition initiative, it's changed the whole way. So we are now like respectable ally in the alliance. And what does it bring to Czech Republic, and what is our main role right now? I think we have to increase our defense spending. You know, it's something that U.S. was saying for a very long time when we were not listening, and now in Hague we actually agreed on spending 5% by 2035. It's like it's 3.5% for like defense expenditure and 1.5 on like defense related, which is like military mobility that's connected to European Union. So that's something we have to work on. We have to work on how our strategic communication, because I think we do not talk to our public openly. We're just trying to hide something. You know, we're doing like everything's okay, but we have to be prepared for the worst things coming. Like maybe they're not happening. You know, that's the best outcome we have. But I think we should be openly communicating with the public. That's our one of the biggest roles. You know, the whole of government approach, the whole of society approach is something we have to work on. We're just, you know, always like just there waiting. We have to be just more active. We are always reactive in things, and we have to act right now. For the role of Czechia, if there's any like crisis on the eastern flank of the alliance, our main role is host nation support. There will be transfers through Czech Republic. That's something that's, you know, my friends are always asking me like, is the war happening? And I'm like, even if the war is happening, we are not probably gonna be the first target, like, but there will be transfers going there and back through the Czech Republic, and that's something we have to work on. We have to prepare the public that it's something that might happen, so I think that's the main case for us.
Thank you, Veronika, for this perspective. I think it's also very valuable to understand how the role of NATO has been changing, and also what role Czechia has actually expected or plays in this regard. Looking at time, I think I'm really having a great time with this debate. But we are approximately in the half of the panel. So I would turn now to the second question, which I prepared, and whether the rules-based international order is still relevant, which I think we touched upon a bit in the previous contributions. But so I would start from the end and perhaps ask Veronika on how do you see the role of Czechia in this regard? You mentioned that the several initiatives and the commitments that are really putting a lot of pressure also on spending, right, on the budget. Obviously, this might be, you know, sort of providing certain polarization within society. You actually touch upon on explaining the role of NATO, which is definitely, in compared to the past, playing a significant central role in providing the rules that we actually build, that we share within the EU and the NATO as well. So how do you read this? And then is there any, you know, notion that according to you, what actually needs to be fulfilled in order to prevail the values that we stand on in the alliances that we are in?
Okay.
This is a very difficult question.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. I'm not happy to be the first one, but yeah, that's as I said before, we have to talk to people because they're like, you've seen it. We had elections. We know what the outcome was, what probability of the new government, and I'm speaking of someone who's working for the government. So. People are probably scared, and they want to trust the people who are saying that everything's okay, and also, or maybe not saying the whole truth. They were saying that the ammunition initiative is going to end because it's too expensive. It's not too expensive. We didn't spend, like, I think 1% of it last year or this year. It's cost probably just the salary of very few people who are working on it. So I think it's very cheap for us, actually, and we are not saying this to the people. So I think that's one thing. And the rules-based or international order, I think we live in it. We want to live in it, but the thing is that not everybody is playing with the same rules. Like, you know, I think the problem is we are playing according to those rules. And oh my God, that's really good thing that we're doing. But the thing is, the adversaries are not playing the same game. And this is something that's challenging us probably, and will be the more and more things are going to be happening in the future. For me, what I wanted to probably say before as well, you know, we're facing different kind of war right now because we're facing way more hybrid threats, cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, sabotages. It's things like that are changing the warfare, and that's something that also attacks the society. It's very cheap also for the adversaries because, you know, like to buy ammunition, tanks and stuff like that, that's very expensive. But to pay for some trolls on the internet, that's not that expensive, and it makes a huge impact. So we have to work on education, educate people on that stuff. And yeah, that's it probably. Thank you.
No, but I think you raised very good points discussing this hybrid war attacks that have different nature, which I think we never experienced to such an extent any time before, right?
Exactly.
So I think it really puts us in a completely new situation when we do know how to adapt, when the technologies are really rapidly evolving, and this is again putting us in a new situation. Otton, you mentioned previously the dynamics in the EU, around the EU, and if I try to link this with the notion on the rules-based world, what, from your perspective, what is actually what should happen so the rules that we've been trying to care of decades should. So they prevail. Yeah? Should there be the alliances? Because we discuss also the fragmentation, and then you touch upon it actually very well with the different interests of the small, the medium sizes, and the big countries, and the fragmentation, and in terms of also the interest that we see in the EU also beyond. So what should be the answer? So again, the rules prevail.
Yes. I think that the European Union has a very big challenge ahead of it. On the one hand, this is a rules-based group of countries, a rule-based union. Without rules, procedures, the EU is disappearing. We did see this during the Eurozone crisis, where there was this amazing effort to really stick to the rules and not kind of go astray, because that really was going to destroy the whole purpose of what the European Union is all about. So I am hopeful in a way that within the EU, and despite the disruptions and the spoilers in terms of how rules operate, there is a common understanding among all the countries themselves of how they have to abide by the rules in one form or another. So that, for me, it is a hopeful sign. The biggest problem is, how do you operate in a world, as you said, that is becoming a world of competing narratives? This is a very big problem, because the way that Russia or China understand the global environment is not the same, and is very different sometimes from how the EU is understanding this. Similarly, there is a global south, as we call it, which is composed by some middle powers, but also many other states that are not following what used to be the Western cosmopolitan kind of rule-based approach, and again, trying to be independent of all the other influences that they are seeing, not just the Western, but also the other great powers. I believe that the biggest frustration of the European Union is what's happening in the United States. This is really something that totally complicates our understanding, our attitude, and how to strategize for the future. When you have a president of the United States who completely does away with multilateralism, EU is multilateral, has different approaches towards the rule of law, the way that the separation of powers in the democratic state should function, issues like environment or defense, then you just lose the floor down on your feet. And that, I believe, is the biggest question for the European Union, because the transatlantic is really the anchor of the European Union to be able to have some kind of influence abroad. If you lose this kind of anchor, and you are tied, or not tied as much, to a presidency that says one thing on Monday, a different thing on Wednesday, and another thing on Friday, then you are kind of totally confused as to what is happening. And this is where I believe is the biggest thing, to see what kind of alliance there is there, because inside the EU, yeah, the thing is, is progressing, and more or less, and as a result of crisis, in an integration kind of environment. I mean, we are more and more, we are tied to each other.
Thank you very much, Otton, for raising this element and the transatlantic partnership. I'm pretty sure that we can come back to that later on. Monica, you previously actually mentioned the willingness of the EU and to push the EU also to simplify, to become more action-able, if I can say so, in terms of the new mandate of the Commission and the initiatives that we already see that are happening, and there are more to come, obviously, and we are all excited to see more, because I think talking about the single market, we could then further touch upon the competitiveness, everything, and so on. But going back to the question of the rules-based world and the alliances. I asked a question, or actually you said as a reaction that the EU obviously acts under pressure, right? And then that actually has a huge potential. But do you see that there is enough leadership and the alliances, and perhaps also provide enough power, put it this way, and to really deliver?
So I think I should refrain from commenting on a situation in the United States per se. But what I can say that the EU leadership is trying to prove that the rules-based order works. And when it comes to, for example, the issue of tariffs, you could see that EU was trying to prove that the predictability, which is the main aspect of the rules-based structure, is beneficial for everybody. And as an example, I can use the other trade agreements which has been signed with several other partners, but US. And if you follow a little bit the trade policy of the EU, you could see that it took years to negotiate, for example, the agreement with Mercosur or with Indonesia or with Thailand and I don't know who else. But after the new leadership in the US, these trade agreements have been like this. So India, for example, it took decades to negotiate, and the colleagues in the DG Trade, which is the structure within the European Commission working on the agreement, have been desperate because it was one step front, two step back. But after the new world order came with the US positioning itself a bit differently, this has been easy. So the predictability which is linked to the rules-based structure, again, I repeat, is sometimes or many times beneficial. And the thing which I think is also predictable for the EU, that it will not change its positioning on rules-based order. It will always be a strong supporter and defender of this type of governing. And not that it will backtrack and somehow try to do it differently. So this is another good news for all of us, I think.
Thank you, Monica, for this. I remain with the same question, and actually lead us a little bit back on what Jaroslav covered at the very beginning when talking about the completely new situation when we face the unpredictability that we are facing conflicts in an, let's say, a new architecture with different sort of roles of the actors. So what is the way out of it? We've been discussing, or Oton also mentioned again, fragmentation, the different dynamics in the member states. There are some signs that in certain initiatives work on the, let's say, sharing the common values. We haven't mentioned yet the initiative or the alliance of willing, right, and so on. Is this the way we can get the stability that we had back?
Are you seriously asking me what is the way out of it? Well, I wouldn't know even where to begin. But the thing is that the world of many powers and the world of many power centers and the world of many worlds is a world of many rule books. It's a world of, as you put it, world of many different competing narratives. So this one thing that we can say, if we allow ourselves maybe a little prediction. This kind of structure and this kind of environment might very well motivate geopolitical and geoeconomic opportunism. that state actors and other actors might basically treat the international system or the international arena as one giant shopping mall. That if you want security, you go here. If you want norms, you go here. If you want economic cooperation and production, you go here. If you want easy money, go to China. And it can very well change the behavior on part of the state actors to be opportunistic about which rule book they will be abiding by, and so that's a real possibility. The second possibility is actually how that's going to or the second small prediction is how that's going to transform state-based leadership. This kind of opportunism can very well lead to either political neutrality or ideological flexibility. That state leaders are more likely to be ideologically flexible, less committed to the dominant rule books, and in order to keep their options open. It may even lead to a situation where we'll see the creation of smaller subgroups, clubs within clubs, rules within rules, smaller rule books within larger rule books. And unfortunately, I think that this is a very fertile ground for political populism, for political cynicism, because unfortunately, cynicism is actually a very efficient strategy for coping in this multipolar world, because you need to be a bit cynical, to be less committed to a particular rule book, to reap the opportunities that as they present themselves to you from the international environment. So this is something that we have to be very, very cautious about going forward and not allow it to escalate. The same thing about the clubs within clubs. We already see smaller subgroups within the EU. We see states isolating themselves within NATO, within other international bodies. And how to solve that? I wouldn't even dream of. I don't think that'd be a very ambitious guess, but I don't have the recipe for that.
But at least
Can I ask, are you taking also Q&A from...
Yeah, I will, just shortly, just a second. Thank you very much for this. I think you don't need to provide the answer. I think you get very interesting elements, right, including the ideological flexibility in general, right, as you mentioned, you know, very transaction-based approaches coming from the actors. So this is actually very interesting. Anyways, looking at time, indeed, we have approximately 10-15 minutes before the break. So this is now the time for Q&As. I'm happy that there are already some of them. So if I can ask my colleague to pass the mic. Thank you. So we have over there one, and then the gentleman over here in the front.
Yes.
Well, question and comment. Again, great discussion. We basically started with the great powers. And I think that, like you said, that it's very difficult to predict the future, but I think that Europe should actually define one objective what to do in this mess. And if you said about power, in my opinion, is the ability to impose your own will against someone else's interest. So I think that the key objective of Europe be in position that nobody can eventually impose its will, even militarily. And I think that let's say, the importance, in my opinion, is first military. Second, we have not fully exercised the opportunity of the single EU market. I don't want to go into detail. And the last, and it's related to defense, I think that that Europe is actually being defeated in the hybrid or disinformation warfare. So I think just a question whether you think that these should be or could be the priorities of Europe, how to actually defend itself. I don't know, maybe that you read that Ray Dalio, one famous hedge fund manager, predicted like 30% probability of civil war in the United States. We cannot influence it. We need to monitor what's going on in the US, but we should not define, in my opinion, other actions like being responsive to what's going on in the US. Europe needs to have its own strategy. Thank you.
A tough question. I'm not sure whether there is a voluntary... So who's gonna ask this? Yeah, please.
If I understood your question is if the hybrid war should be a priority for Europe or defense in general?
Well, basically, if I say the priorities that Europe should focus on, it's on military safety. Second, getting as much as possible from the single market. I don't know, we can theorize about finally one single language across the whole Europe, whatever. It's complex. And third, it's really how we tackle the information warfare that we are not dealing with effectively.
So you are a candidate for becoming a president of the European Commission because actually these are the main priorities for the current European Commission, led second time by Ursula von der Leyen. She just selected the three, like defense, security, then the competitiveness and finalization of single market and democracy, including the fight with disinformation as the three priorities for the Commission. So you are there.
Altan, would you like to react?
Yeah, I would like to add a dimension to this. And you said something right. I mean, single market is a very, very strong point. And it pains me sometimes to see that the European Union is not using this to its own benefit. It was such a humiliating experience what happened between Ursula von der Leyen and Trump. I mean, I fully appreciate the issue of predictability, definitely, and how Germany, of all countries, was the one that really pushed to that direction as well, because it wanted that kind of certainty. But it really kind of suffered when I see how much stronger economically, also vis-a-vis Russia as well, that sometimes it is acting as a small actor. There is a very big problem inside the European Union which we haven't touched yet. It's the problem of legitimacy of democratic governments. So we live in a world where authoritarianism is rising elsewhere, and the European Union is becoming like an island of democratic, not stability, but instability. And there is a bottom-up legitimacy problem, and the fact that citizens don't find their government effective to deliver. Issues of inequality, very, very important as a social economic base for a lot of what is happening right now. So it is a very big problem to be able to operate your democracy when it is being contested. I noticed that the latest summit that took place, it actually focused on the rise of far right, which is what many governments also separately are doing in Europe.
Good, and I think there is a question here in the front. Gentleman, please.
I want to ask Monica about why is the 28 regime proposed as directive and not as regulation? Because from the economical standpoint, it doesn't make sense to have 28 implementation as not just one, as 27, and like this would be just, it's just supposed to be just one for like whole member states. And the second part about the anonymity, as you were speaking in the Foreign Affairs Council and other types, why do we need it, as we are not able to basically function as a states also on the EU level or NATO level, as you were speaking, because we have Trojan horses like Slovakia and Hungary, and we need to do something like coalition of willing to like use another platform, even we have platforms for it, like how to solve anonymity basically.
Yes, please.
So for the first part, I assume that you are talking about this new project, which is how to make sure that the single market, which is not yet completed, and this is, I think, if we are able, as the European Union, finalize and really stick to the same rules within the 27, sorry. Maybe you will join again. 27, then I think economically we are much safer. And I'm sure that you've heard the numbers, but I will repeat it. There is this number, 45%. And this is how much we are losing within the EU because we are not able to cut the barriers within the member states when it comes to the market and trade. So this is compared to the 15% of the tariffs with the US, much more. And this number goes up to the 100% when it comes to the services. The first one is just for how we are trading the goods within the member states. So what I want to say that a single market is again one of the genius project within the EU, which is meant that the entire EU strives economically, but we are not able to finalize it because every member state had its own nitty-gritty details in the legislation, which are then burdening this kind of a free space for trading. And there is an idea that for overcoming these barriers, it would be too difficult to go to the 27 legislations and to see, how we are making sure that we complete the harmonization. But we will establish a new legal system for businesses, for trading goods and services, which will be voluntarily for companies or individuals to join. And this is not yet decided, just to answer your question, if it's a directive or regulation. The consultations about how this 28th legal regime should be structured, public consultations were closed, and now colleagues are working, I think, with the use of artificial intelligence, I hope, to prepare the first proposal. And obviously regulation, for those who are familiar with the types of EU legislation, would be much more efficient than directive. So let's hope that it will be regulation. Thank you.
And there was a second very challenging question related to the unanimity within the EU, and I would say a quite difficult discussion on how to proceed and provide more actions that EU can provide or deliver on behalf of the member states, even though they all might not be agreed. Is this still something that can really bring to more actions to the EU, or is this something that you still think that should be present when it comes to the decision making?
How many of you are familiar with the institute called Enhanced Cooperation? You are. So this is something that already exists in the EU legislation, and it means that if there is a proposed EU legislation and the member states are not necessarily willing to agree, they can go to this special structure that there are only few of them saying, okay, we want to cooperate on this basis, legal basis, we agree among ourselves. And this happens not so often, but sometimes. For example, when it comes to the European Public Prosecutor Office, which has been established on the basis of enhanced cooperation among 22 member states, and then the others can join later, and some did. Guess who didn't? Hungary. Okay. So this type of cooperation, which is not necessarily including everybody, already exists. And I think not many, it's not known. So this whole coalition of willing, which is now also bringing on board others, is also something new. So I think that there is always the flexibility. And what I learned myself within my 11 years experience working, if I may say, at the kind of a very horizontal level and also political level within the European Commission, is that everybody is always looking for a solution. If there is no one or second way to go, we look for the third way. And I hope that this will also happen in this very complex and chaotic situation we are today.
I think we still have, let's say, 1 or 2 minutes for a very last question. So I see the gentleman in the rear row, please.
Thank you for this debate. It's been very insightful. I just have a very short question for Ms. Jelinkova. I wanted to ask about, you talked about communicating to the general public about preparedness for worse times, I suppose. While I agree that education, in schools and generally in universities is obviously necessary and it's the easy way, how do you educate a public that is already sort of fatigued from hearing about wars and, is quite easily influenced by politicians or other actors who, use cynicism to sort of drive up political points when war and stuff like this is spoken about. Thank you.
Yeah, very good one. Veronica, over to you.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, that's not an easy question. But from my perspective, when I say that we have to communicate with the general public, and I didn't say war. I think we just have to be honest. We just have to say there is a possibility, something can happen, but if we will be strong together, we can face those crises. We can work together, be prepared, and then we are ready to work together. I don't know. Sweden has this crisis brochure, and they also have, it's not a conscription, but they have a system that the whole society is working when the crisis comes. That's the name of the brochure. And I think we should be talking in intentions of this. I don't think we need to talk specifically about war, because we don't know if there will be war. Nobody knows that. And there is a war in Ukraine, but I think we just have to talk openly and say things can happen, but we will face them together as one society, one country, and we will come stronger after that. But if we will be talking to the public and saying, oh, everything's okay, we will be focusing on us, it doesn't work like that. And we know that the general public maybe don't know it, I don't know, but we cannot be hiding, our hands in the sand and waiting for everything be gone. I think that's the main narrative, what I mean when we say strategic communication to public.
Linkova from the Ministry of Defense, Otanas Anastasakis from University of Oxford, Monika Ladmanova, representation of the European Commission in Czechia, and my colleague Jaroslav Weinfurter here from the faculty. I'm calling a 10 minutes break, and we'll be back at 6:30 with the second panel called Maneuvering Amid Turbulence, Unpredictability and Instability in the New Black. So see you in 10 minutes.
We're about to start with the second panel. Thank you. Thank you for staying with us with this kind of warm environment. We're about to start economic panel. I'm always happy to moderate the economic part because it's so much easier than all the political science and everything. I also have distinguished panelists with me, which will make it even easier. And with Francesca, we've prepared a special surprise because we are all overexcited about the recent Nobel Prize. So we will start with discussing that. All right, the panel's topic is maneuvering amid turbulence. We will speak namely about industrial and maybe investment and innovation policies. We'll take the European perspective, we'll take the national perspective, and we also take one branch, the automotive, as a case study. I'm more than happy to invite first Francesca Guadagno. Super. Italian, right? Yeah. I have 3 semesters of Spanish, you know, so it's easy. From the Vienna Institute of International Economic Studies, an institute that our faculty actually uses as a good place for our PhD students to learn a lot, which in fact, Michal went through. So Michal Hrubý, PhD candidate at the Department of International Economic Relations, Faculty of International Relations, Prague University of Economics and Business, and also Škoda Auto University, right? Expert in innovation, industrial policy, and car-making industry especially. And David Hrubý, Deputy Minister of Industry and Trade, also experienced teacher in international trade, right, at this wonderful faculty. All right, before we start discussing, in our first email contacts when we wanted to find out how to start this panel, the recent topic of the Nobel Prize in economics, which really is exciting for everyone who's trying to teach about economic growth, creativity, innovation, popped up immediately. So I asked Francesca whether she could maybe elaborate a bit on how exciting and important that Nobel Prize is for all of us who also like this chapter of economics, which is often underestimated, long-term economic growth.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me, for giving me the chance to be here with you this evening. It's really a pleasure to talk in a university. I think I haven't done that in a while. So, and it's especially nice for me to be talking about innovation today, as I am an innovation economist by training. I studied economics of innovation and new technologies. And then I moved on and worked a lot on industrial policy, but innovation has still remained very close to my heart. And actually the news the other day that the Nobel Prize was given to scholars working on innovation made me very happy. Although I have to say that it also left me with a bit of a bitter feeling, because I have a lot of other names in the innovation field which are worth mentioning, and I hope one day will be recognized for their work. But let's start first. So basically what I'll be doing in the next few minutes, I'll be briefly saying why I think it's so important that we talk about innovation today at this critical moment. So we heard a lot about why this moment is critical, but it's not just critical because maybe things will happen, but it's critical also for other reasons. And I'll try to say why it's also important for Europe, and briefly what I like about the findings of the Nobel research, the research that has been awarded the Nobel Prize, and what I think is missing. So first of all, I think it's important to say that innovation drives economic growth. If you let me be a bit provocative, it's not tariffs, it's not rare earths, it's not critical raw materials, it's not global value chains, it's innovation. Innovation is a prerequisite for economic growth, for long-term economic growth. And I think this is important to say today, because otherwise we keep on thinking of the small problem that we have today. We don't see see what is the problem really ahead of us. And it's not just innovation that it is important, and the Nobel Prize is not just given for innovation, but for a particular type of innovation, which is creative destruction. So in the words of Joseph Schumpeter, which is the father of innovation economics, the process of creative destruction is a process through which firms introduce a radically new product or service, so what we call breakthrough innovation, that has the power to destroy the market, disrupt the market. So it's creative because it's introducing something new, but at the same time it destroys everything that was built before. There was something before. So if you want to think about it like the personal computer, before nobody thought, there were these big computers in rooms, there were a few of them, and there was no idea for a personal computer of the smartphone replacing your Nokia little thing. Maybe most of you haven't seen that, but before the smartphone, there was this Nokia thing with just where you could just send messages. Why this is important today? I think it's important, let's start from Czechia. It's important for Czechia to remind of the importance of innovation. In a time where we often read that Czechia and other countries, new member states, have somehow made the most of the old growth model based on convergence and catching up in global value chains, the idea that the new growth model has to start from innovation and be innovation-driven is very powerful for you, I think. But it's also important for Europe. The research behind the Nobel Prize is exactly taking stock of the idea that growth has became the new normal since the Industrial Revolution. And today we seem to think that, or we seem to question whether growth is really the normal. We now talk about degrowth. We ask if we could be happy with degrowth. So there is the idea that we could not grow. And it's also important, of course, for competitiveness, which is one of the topics, as we discussed before, that is very, very central to Europe today. But we are also facing a very unique time where we possibly are in a new technological revolution. So with AI, artificial intelligence, disrupting our lives, our societies, and therefore the question of asking what's the role of innovation and how innovation can be a long-term driver of growth is very important. So there are three concrete things that I really like about the research that was done by the three economists that were that were awarded the Nobel Prize. The first is so of course I'm not going to summarize the work in 5 minutes. You will understand why. But the first thing is the idea of useful knowledge. That's one of the elements in Mockyer research. So there is knowledge that is unuseful and knowledge that is useful. What is useful knowledge? Useful knowledge is knowledge on which you can build a growth model. So, of course, we can have many ideas, we can be creative, and we can create a global, we can create a lot of app on our phones, but are those apps going to change the growth prospects of our countries? Many people have doubts. So we should be really looking at knowledge that is useful and that can create that growth perspectives. And the other element of being a useful knowledge is when knowledge is not just knowledge, but can be translated into commercial products that can be sold on the market. We can be very good at science and research, but if we cannot make products, that we are not going to be growing in economic terms, and we will go back to that later. Then there is the idea of openness to change in the society. We see today a lot of resistance to change, especially when it comes to climate change, which could be the green transition, a new engine of growth for Europe. And also, finally, from the Aghion and Howitt models, we know that the societal rewards of innovation are greater than the firms, the welfare captured by the firm. What does that mean? That there is a market failure in innovation, and therefore we need innovation policy, and that's very important. Now, there are a lot of other economists. So the Nobel Prize was given really to some sort of to a part of economics that is usually very well recognized, the part that makes very complex models that can be solved mathematically, that deliver equilibrium, and that are published in great journals like Econometrica, but there is always a very heterodox field in economics that is often that is under no radar, and I want to give a minute of acknowledgement to that. I think I am an evolutionary economist, so I'm defending my tradition. I'm defending my background, and I think there is a lot to be studied away from empirical models and mathematical models when it comes to innovation. Innovation cannot be studied in equilibrium. It's something that destroys equilibrium. It's something that has to be studied also from a qualitative perspective, understanding the dynamics really that are at play, understanding the specificities. And sometimes certain models need to make certain assumptions, certain generalization that make it mathematically beautiful but far from reality. And therefore, I think it's important to cite people like here in the university, so maybe you will have time to look it up yourselves, people like Dick Nelson, Sidney Winter, Chris Friedman, and Carlotta Perez, who is still alive in London. And their work has if I can just say three things that are important. One is the work on technological revolutions, how they come about, what is the impact. The second thing is, I think, is particularly important for a country like Czechia, is all the studies on national innovation systems. So the idea that firms do not do innovation by themselves, but they need an ecosystem, a system that supports them. And this system is made of linkages. So if you have a great firm, maybe a multinational firm placed somewhere, but this is just making its own stuff without any connection to the rest of the economy, then you have no benefit in the society. And the idea that firms require to acquire capabilities, so certain very complex skills and knowledges that are very difficult to transfer. And all this is very poorly captured in mathematical models.
It really felt like in Stockholm. Thank you for this. Next time it's yours, I know it. All right, so hopefully you enjoy it. I mean, this really is a great thing. Also, if you see the other prizes, I mean, inclusive institutions last year and many others in a row, it really makes us feel that our part of economics starts to matter more. And actually the questions of change management and adaptability are crucial for what we are about to discuss here. So maybe I'll stay with you, Francesca, and let's maybe start with the European level. Yes. Let's talk about European innovation policies. It's up to you, it's an opener, so maybe you raise some questions that we can later discuss with guys. So Europe and its innovation policy, what are your feelings, what you feel is crucial, maybe some drawbacks that you see on the way?
Yeah, so, I think it's that the problem with European innovation policy is that there are certain structural issues that we have, we know that we have and have been there for now decades, and apparently are very difficult to tackle. These are very well analyzed in the Draghi reports. If you know what so the long report that was published last year in September, the future of European competitiveness. But in a nutshell, the problem that I see is essentially one, that we don't have enough good companies or enough companies or big enough companies in the sectors that matter today. So our specialization in mid-technology sectors is not extremely favorable today. So we depend on US companies essentially for anything. We don't have, so there was a point in which we wanted to have Airbus, and we don't have Airbus, Microsoft Airbus, so to say. So we need something like that, I feel. And that's not something that you do with money only, and you don't do it tomorrow if you decided to do it. So the money are there, but sometimes I also feel they are spent a bit here, a bit there, without a clear strategic direction, which now seems to be emerging more, but oftentimes I don't see it. And still the funding is, for obvious reasons, because in a way, the idea is that you shouldn't be using public money, or the returns to public money is higher when you invest early on in the innovation process, so the farthest part away from the market. But then this is the problem we have, that we never go to the market. That I don't know if you have seen the documentary on Google Maps, but apparently Google Maps was invented by some nerds in Berlin, actually Hungarian nerds, and for them it was like a cultural thing. They couldn't see the market potential of it until they went to the States. They said it to Google, and Google stole literally the idea to them. So that for me is the example of why we don't do well in innovation. And exactly that, and this probably links very well with the topic of today, because the idea that innovation has to be close to industrial policy, that the distinction has to be so blurred that you don't know anymore what you're talking about, that's what we should be aiming at, I think.
So is it in education that you can kind of break this destiny that we don't see how to marketize our innovation? I mean, even in my lectures, it's quite important to make it clear that innovation is innovation only when it becomes marketized, that we Europeans feel that if you give enough money to researchers, it's already innovation, but it is not. So where does this actually start in the innovation, in the education system?
That's a very good question. I think there are a lot of now universities in Europe that, especially when it's a more technical university, that they are providing faculties but also students with technology transfer offices. So and they're spinning off, and they are giving the idea that you might have a good idea, but if you leave it in your drawer, nobody will benefit from it. So they are giving opportunities to bring it to the market, but it's an extremely complex process, and it's also a mindset in a way. So it's a difficult one. And also I feel it also has to start with linking more universities with the industry. So I see here your university is placed next to a lot of private companies. This is a good way, I think, to start.
We don't speak to them.
That's why. Yes, I can imagine. You speak different languages, even if it's the same one, yes.
Thank you. David, let's move to the national level. I mean, when talking about the Czech Republic's innovation or industrial policies, we are stuck somewhere in between global integration, which probably was the strategy for quite some time, and the strategic autonomy, which is probably the strategy of the future. So where do we stand as the Czech Republic? Are we good enough in global integration, and is it actually enough, or do we have to redefine our system, our policy as well? And we are in interesting times, taking Czech Republic's policies into account, so I think that there will be tectonic changes soon.
Thank you very much first of all for the invitation, and then for the questions. Where do we stand as a Czech Republic? That's something I would love to know myself, to be honest, because that's in the process of redefining where we stand and where we are heading. Not only the Czech Republic, but whole European Union, because most of our policies related to global trade and supply chain and industrial policies as such are mostly defined on EU level. I will start with maybe brief comments on disruption of supply chains, and then move towards industrial policy. But for let's say for last three decades, since the beginning of 90s, we took stability of supply chains and global trade and the avenue towards global integration and one nice happy global market as something granted. That completely changed during last couple of years. It started with COVID pandemic, and then Russian aggression against Ukraine, and that fully opened the conversation or discussion or whatever you prefer about about our dependencies and vulnerabilities, both on Czech national level and European level. On one hand, the openness of our economy is key. On national level, we are a landlocked country. We cannot exist without trade. Our well-being and our economy is pretty much based on trade, and that's not going to change. That's a structural condition. Whatever we may do, this cannot change. At the same time, resilience and conversation about resilience has become indispensable part of any conversation about openness and about global cooperation. It's quite clear that some dependencies are more complex than others. For instance, energy dependency. You may remember that those 3 years ago, we imported as a Czech Republic 99% of our gas from Russia. The remaining 1% was coming from Germany, but at the end of the day, it was Russian gas anyway. We were able to get rid of the dependency not only in the Czech Republic but in Europe, importing gas or LNG from Norway, US, Middle East, Algeria, and other countries. We were able to act unusually quickly under the pressure of the crisis, and at the end of the day, we are able to handle and manage energy dependency. On the other hand, there are other dependencies which are way more complex and way more complicated to be handled. For instance, semiconductors, chips. They are pretty much everywhere. There are probably, I don't know, several thousand chips in this room or even more right now, and they are way more complicated and interconnected. For example, average semiconductor crosses border 70 times prior to becoming final product, which is quite a lot. So we need to work with those dependencies and make distinction, which is challenging, which are critical and which are less harmful. And that conversation should be based on the importance of the sector and on the level which we can use substitutes for any given product or service. This step would be expensive. We cannot change our supply chains overnight. That requires complicated decision-making process, not only within the government but among businesses and academia as well. And then it requires money. On the other hand, it's still significantly cheaper to deal with building of resilient supply chains compared to dealing with the disruption. It's like the war. It's cheaper to do whatever you can do to prevent the war than to go into the actual war. That's simple mechanics. On EU level, that brought us to the new momentum related to trade diversification. We all know what's happening with China, especially quite recently, their activities related to export licensing and rare metals and minerals. What's happening last almost a year in the US and the trade policy, that's something which was, to be honest, beyond our imagination a few years ago. Then, of course, ongoing war at Ukraine, Middle East. The world is certainly not becoming a friendlier place. which means that we as European Union, in terms of trade policy and our international partnerships, we must focus on strengthening the ties with those remaining around the globe, which we still consider kind of stable and reliable. And the way we can strengthen our ties with them is to create a network of free trade agreements, providing a backbone for preferential trade relations. Quite recently, those agreements were concluded with entities like Mercosur, or countries like Mexico, Indonesia, Chile, and others. We hope to conclude negotiations with other partners like India, Australia, Thailand, and others. In some cases by the end of the year, in other cases as soon as possible. At the same time, we have learned that open trade is not enough. We need to focus more on technologies and innovation. That was mentioned by Francesca. We certainly need innovation policy, carefully designed and balanced, to be able to produce in the Czech Republic and European Union products and services which would be competitive globally. And that's indeed challenging. At national level, as the Czech Republic, what we should do is to direct state activities and state support towards areas with high potential for economic growth and high added value. That's the backbone of economic strategy of the current government and an economic strategy of potential new government as well. And there is shared understanding that we need to strengthen cooperation between companies, researchers, academia, and state. Sectors which are in general considered of high interest from the perspective of government are areas like energy, AI, digital economy, cybersec, mobility, especially automotive, especially electromobility and autonomous mobility, creative industries, biotech, and others. On the EU level, we've been trying to find a balance between protecting our industries against unfair competition from others, and at the same time keeping the trade open. To a certain extent, this is reflected in a so-called economic security strategy, which is closely linked with the resilience of supply chains, and it's based on 3 pillars. Those 3 pillars are partnerships with others around the globe, promotion of our own industries, and protection of our industries against unfair competition. Industrial policy, as such, indeed closely based with innovation policy, falls under the promote pillar. We need to explore ways how we can effectively promote sectors of strategic importance for European Union and for the Czech Republic. And at the same time, we need to figure out how to promote them in a way which would still guarantee openness in global trade. That's basically the concept of strategic autonomy. We need to focus on sectors which are of critical importance, and we need to create conditions for the companies to excel. Finding the right balance between the unfair promotion of our own companies to make them resilient and competitive on one side, and against shifting towards, let's say, protectionism. That's extremely complicated, because there are also always tendencies among EU member states to move on one side or the other side. but only the carefully designed approach with the right balance could deliver the results which we need. And we need to make sure that neither industrial policy nor innovation policy could be used as an excuse to close our borders and to become, in worst case scenario, something like Fortress Europe, protecting our industries against global competition. That, at the end of the day, would be basically highway to economic help. One last comment: what are the trends and what's going to happen in the years to come in global economy? That predictable unpredictability as a buzzword has become new normal, and that's we would love to think that that's short-term issue, but that's it's not probably going to change at least till the end of the current term of U.S. administration, second Donald Trump administration, and we'll see what's going to happen afterwards. We've been having chat with all other partner countries around the globe, and they share this perspective. I spoke over the summer with the chairman of and a member of Canadian Parliament and chairman of Czech-Canadian partnership group, and we discussed what's happening in the U.S. And he told me there is ongoing joke in Canadian Parliament that whatever is going to happen any given day in the U.S. is based on the mood of Donald Trump when he goes to the bathroom at 2 a.m. And that's the conversation they've been having in Canada. And when we spoke with AmCham, which is American Chamber of Commerce here in the Czech Republic, representing all the major U.S. investors, they told us that they are, and companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Red Hat, IBM, many others. They told us that they are 100% sure that the only certainty is uncertainty. And even them being major U.S. businesses, they cannot guarantee what could happen any given day. Which means that predictable unpredictability is going to stay with us in probably in the years to come, maybe all the way till third administration of Donald Trump, if that's going to happen, which is still quite unlikely. But you may have seen the posters on his social network accounts, and there are quite a few jokes in that regard. But it may be G.D. Vance administration or Donald Jr. administration. We'll see. The point is that nothing can be taken for granted. We as European Union and Czech Republic, we need to take our lesson. We need to work with supply chains globally to make them as diversified and as stable as possible. At the same time, we need to be able to protect our industries against unfair competition if needed. And we need to strengthen the partnerships with like-minded countries. And there are still few. The numbers are diminishing, but there are still few around the globe sharing our perspective. So technically, we know what's happening. We are aware of the developments around the globe. The question is, are we going to be able to act accordingly or not? And that's something we'll see in the years to come. And let me stop right here and leave the rest for the discussion.
Thank you, David. I will have one question maybe, because you remained pretty well on the macroeconomics level, but time is tough and it's not enough. the Nobel Prize show us that you can offer everyone everything, but if they don't take it as a chance, it's worth nothing. Francesca also mentioned that what we are missing in Europe is not better politicians, it's not at the end of it all better schools, even though they can play a role, it's better or more entrepreneurial business people. So when you think about Czech business people, offering them agreement with Mercosur, how many of them are actually ready? I mean, not only physically, but also mentally, to take this opportunity, to risk it, to give it a chance?
It's a pretty good question because it's not coincidence. We've been exporting about 80% of our exports to European member states, and part of governmental policies during last 2 decades in terms of export promotion was the intention to diversify, to look beyond the borders of the European Union, and to provide incentives and triggers for the Czech businesses to look out of the box and explore the world which is waiting out there. And so far, during the last decade, the most important shift in terms of decreasing the number of our exports going to EU and increasing the number of exports going beyond the European Union borders was the moment when UK left the EU, which is kind of sad, but it seems during the last 2 or 3 years, basically since the end of COVID, that we are slowly, really slowly, but steadily heading in the right direction. One thing is mindset. Majority of the Czech businesses used to be happy with doing business in Europe. That business, 2015, 2017, 2018, all those years, from European perspectives and perspective of European businesses, those were happy years. The economy was booming, export was booming, everything was bright and flowers and unicorns, and for the businesses, there weren't any significant reasons to look beyond the European Union borders, because that would mean certain level of discomfort, investment, and the right mindset. I worked for 5 years in Canada, helping Czech businesses interested in doing business with Canadian companies, and I once approached a Czech company among probably top 5 globally in their sector, because there was a business to be done, significant business to be done in Canada, almost guaranteed, but that would require probably dozens of millions of dollars investment. And they told me, it's interesting, we know that at the end of the day we will be probably awarded with the contract, but that would require investment in capacity building on our side, and we are not interested. Why should we make that extra step? And that perception was kind of shared with unfortunately high number of Czech companies. And we've been, of course, constantly as a ministry and other ministries, we've been trying to convince them to look beyond the borders of everyday life and out of their comfort zone. That has changed, and it has been changing since COVID, because more and more businesses have been realizing that they need to venture out. They need to look for other markets outside of Europe, and they cannot rely on Germany or Poland or Slovakia. Because in case you depend, let's say 80% of your exports go to German market. If you lose that market, then you are basically done. So there are more and more companies coming interested in international expansion. it's extremely slow. We have products. We have the right products. We don't have the mindset. I do agree with that. And in general, there is the decades-old saying that we are, as Czechs and Europeans in general, we are not really good in sales and marketing. And that's the fact. That's the way it is. And if, let's say, for instance, we look into our numbers exporting to US, then direct exports are about 70% of the overall value, which means that another 1/3 of our exports going to US, there is a middleman. It could be in Germany, it could be in Canada, simply someone better in sales and in marketing. And all the margin out of those 30% that goes to someone else. So we've been working with Czech companies and trying to convince them that their products are competitive, they should spend some extra effort, walk an extra mile, and it's worthy. The numbers are growing, but still are extremely low, lower than we would like to see. But at the end of the day, there are not many other options left.
Can you maybe only very briefly mention 2 or 3 industries where you really see the chances are high? Because when we speak, especially to secondary school students, you really see a huge skepticism about whether the Czech Republic really has something to offer, that maybe if you want to do something, you rather go directly to Silicon Valley because simply the country does not offer anything. Can you name, as an example, as a good chance, 2 or 3 industries where you see we really can have global ambitions?
I will start with a little bit more general answer, and then I will try to suggest 2 or 3 industries. But we are still, and we are still really good in, how should I describe it? Excellent hardware. Let's put it that way, because Silicon Valley and US, they are extremely good at services. But we've been having constant chat with many Czech companies active in the US and around the globe. And most of manufacturing, classical manufacturing, left US during last 3 decades. They are extremely competitive in services and AI and IT and cybersec and energy industries and agriculture. But in terms of classical manufacturing, it's really complicated to build a factory in the US and to create a local supply chain. I assume that most of you know or have heard about Taiwanese chip manufacturer, TSMC. They committed themselves to build a massive factory in US. It's probably kind of exchange for the security reasons, but they've been having huge difficulties setting up local supply chain in US because the skills are not there, the workers are not there, the education is not there, and it's really challenging to build it from scratch. In terms of our industries, I believe that classical manufacturing and engineering is extremely strong. Hardware related to energy sectors, turbines, cogeneration units. Those companies are among the best in the world. Railway industry is really good. Aerospace industry, globally competitive, and of course defense. Defense is getting, for obvious reasons, stronger and stronger.
Thank you very much. They don't seem sexy enough for the young students, probably, but you're right. We are good at this, and we definitely must benefit on what we are good at. Your example also marvelously leads me to Michal. I must say that I love driving Škoda cars. But when you said about we are good at hardware and not very good at software, it really reminded me my Škoda car. So, Michal, hopefully you're not losing your second job today because taking part in this panel. Let's go deeper into one specific industry, car making. You have plenty of things you can build upon, let's say what China says about rare metals these days and so on. So it's up to you, just an opener. Same things, same questions, just specific industry.
Thank you very much for this question, for the lovely panel. Also thanks to all of you. I mean, I know that maybe some of you are already waiting for the glass of wine, so I will try to make it quick, but I hope you enjoyed the debate so far. So yes, I will try to give you 3 different perspectives on the auto industry, especially looking at the global value chains and the shifts happening, and also to its clean transition. Because now as we see, some of the ambitious climate policies are more and more turning to sort of green industrial policies. And I actually want to, with the first sort of point out of the 3 that I will mention, I want to go back to what Francesca mentioned, because it's actually Philippe Aghion, one of the Nobel Prize winners, with a paper already 15 years ago, actually saying exactly what is now happening. If you have incumbents, if you have the companies working in the automotive industry for a very long time, and they have a very strong history in innovations, mostly related to these sort of dirty technologies, as we sort of call them today, it's much harder for them to actually transition towards, clean innovations. It's actually much harder for these companies to switch their businesses, to sort of start to innovate in new areas. So that's actually what is happening when we look at the automotive industry and some sort of struggles also with the shift within the innovation path. And that's what Philippe Aghion published like 15 years ago, and that's what we actually see in practical terms happening. So that's more or less the institutional perspective. And of course, we would like to see some predictability when it comes to this institutional framework and the policies which are applied, because those remedies proposed by Aghion were exactly to have a very strong climate policy, to have a very strong carbon pricing, but also always supplemented with industrial policy. So that was the sort of main message of the research. Now, the second, maybe more macroeconomic perspective is when we speak of vulnerabilities and maybe not really a shift in our dependence, but a shift in how we perceive this dependence, how we shift our view on this vulnerability. In the automotive industry, if we look at what we produce here in Europe, gradually for already 30 years, we've been sort of outsourcing more and more things to mostly Asia, including China, and this was not perceived as any sort of dependence. It was not perceived as any vulnerability. It's the companies that make the business, and it's their decision. And of course, since accession of China into World Trade Organization, of course, it went smoothly up. So now, in let's say 30 years, our dependence on all the inputs that we use in our automotive industry to actually produce these Skoda Auto cars, this dependence on all these inputs doubled. And it was not perceived sort of on the way, it was not perceived as a vulnerability. It's now a shift in perspective, shift in geopolitics. And the third, more sort of microeconomic aspect, as Pavel mentioned about the rare earths, this is also good to remind ourselves about what is the scale. Because if you now look at the numbers, what actually are the supplier-buyer linkages in manufacturing and, of course, in automotive industry, you see that these rare earths and also other critical materials and minerals like lithium and many others, of course, not only that they are produced by Chinese companies, they are mostly refined by the companies. And we see that if we take a representative sample of European manufacturing companies, maybe not all of them, maybe a very tiny amount of them have a direct linkage to these Chinese suppliers. But actually, if you look at not only these direct purchases, but also all the indirect purchases, approximately 80% of these companies is to some extent reliant on those rare earths from Chinese companies, maybe through one single subsidiary. And that's where the issue is now, of course, most visible, because approximately let's say 60–70% of all these intermediaries through which we get all these Chinese supplies is actually US. So the more US-China tensions, the more impact also on Europe, because simply said, it's firms that do trade, not countries, and these firms have a very strong supply chains which are simply rooted in China and US. So even if we would like to sort of shift away and consider different ways how to sort of lower the risks and how to diversify, of course this will not be able to do, you know, in a year, in a 2, maybe in 5, maybe in 10, maybe in 15. Let's see.
You also see the mindset shift happening, or the resistance is still too big? And I especially ask you as a young researcher, because of course when you speak about creative destruction, for a youngster not seeing all the history, it's much better to let go, right? I can understand that people that were working there in Mladá Boleslav, they saw the transition, they saw how the factory looked like when Germans first came in. So it's easier for you to let go. So do you see that the mindset is actually shifting in the industry, or is it still too hard to let go?
Yeah. Well, I think it definitely is shifting. As you mentioned, maybe, hopefully I will not lose my job, but traveling with Skoda Auto Enyaq this summer through Italy, it was really painful to deal with the software, okay? No. The Italy traffic, okay, that was also painful, but to deal with the Skoda Auto software, that was one relatively painful, you know, thing about it.
You just lost sponsor, you know it, right?
And when you sort of compare it, because I had the opportunity to travel to China this year, and when you simply see how a different pace of innovation there is, and when you see what the product, the car as a product, what it is, it's really very different. I mean, we don't speak here, for example, about karaoke as something that we need in our cars. It's very different consumer preferences. It's very different type of innovation that's being done in China. So even though we shift our mindset, I think it's not shifting as much as sort of towards this Chinese type of consumer. But I think that, yes, the mindset is shifting, and definitely we cannot think of automotive industry as being based on the sort of manufacturing and factory-like production anymore. Of course, it's much more software, it's much more digitalization, and of course, this is what Skoda Auto and many other European incumbents work on. But maybe the question is how fast this shift is happening, but definitely it will happen, and it is happening.
Thank you. We are ready to take 2 or 3 questions from the auditorium. I will ask you for brief questions. I will take them all, and I will then try to distribute them to the panelists. Martin? Take the mic, because we are also having stream.
First, regarding the topic Michal discussed, we are facing the mistakes of the past. The question is, what are the current mistakes we are going to face in 10 years? It's always the point. We learned China to produce, to innovate. We moved all the production there. I remember when I was a student, I was surprised what the hell is happening, what's going to happen in the future. So what's happening now, we are going to discuss in 5–10 years. That's the questions, whatever. Second, you mentioned also in the first panel, the goods, services. How about financial market? Friedrich Merz mentioned that yesterday. We desperately need European financial market to finance the businesses, to collect the capital in Europe so we can finance the innovation, the big companies, because what we are doing now, we are outsourcing in China and investing in the US. It can't work. It can't work. We can have strategies, we can have plans, but without functioning market in Europe, without really completing the single market, it's nonsense. So 2 slight topics, which I would like it's not necessarily to be to comment, because I think we all agree on that. But I really think this financial aspect is underestimated and not so much discussed in these discussions, but it's crucial, because what's happening now, I have some money, I'd like to invest. I do invest in the US. I would like to buy a car. they are not to be had at the moment in Europe, the cars I would like to buy. So what the hell is happening? You know, so it's about common sense, not just about strategies and big plans, whatever, yeah.
Thank you. Do we have Josef?
Thank you. I hope it will not be too simplifying or, let's say, easy question. I'm asking about the idea of Schumpeter, creative destruction. If we consider the environment in the Europe regarding this topic, do you think that we have sufficient space for this creative destruction that should support innovation? And if you look at the case of car industry and current debate about electromobility, and if we can allow to open our market to Chinese.
And one more by Michaela.
I sort of wanted to ask a question that builds upon the first one. You mentioned the lack of mindset, and you said an interesting thing that the students are looking abroad because we see that the country has very little to offer. So I guess my question is, do you think that which part is lacking? Is it the lack of mindset? Is it the unwillingness to scale up? Or is it the lack of sufficient framework? The lack of what was being said, the available private funding? So where would you see the pain points, so to speak? And the second question is, we talked a lot about uncertainty and how it is very predictable that unpredictable times are gonna come. And my question is, do we need certainty for innovation? Because as we know, necessity is the mother of innovation. So how do you see that happening? Like, do we need certain times for innovation? Because I don't think we do.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all the questions. I will try to wrap them up and distribute them. David, when talking about financing startups, there are things that will happen soon in the Czech Republic, right? Prepared by the old government, but probably will be adopted by the new one as well. So maybe if you can elaborate a bit on that, so whether the young entrepreneurs have a chance that things will move in the right direction. Francesca, the space for creative destruction, and also maybe the wonderful question of certainty that we actually need to step out of our comfort zones to actually innovate. I mean, I see it on my kids every day that you are innovative when you have to, when you're not certain. And Michal, again, let's use your youth against you. If you should decide for an entrepreneurship career in the Czech Republic or in Europe, why would you do so? What would be the things that you would consider as pro for Europe? And maybe Francesca, we give David some time to check the legislature, right?
Absolutely, we don't need uncertainty. We need, and in a way, sometimes people ask me if it's about, there are two forces in innovation that in a way go one against the other, but they could also play well together. And one is path dependency. So the idea that you need a certain stability, so you need to build on what you know. But you also need serendipity. You also need that thing that comes up in a moment. And for that, you don't need certainty. Actually, uncertainty is the best. And even when I think of, and that's why I mentioned at the beginning, this issue with rare earths, I understand the problem. It's a serious one. But can't we see it as an opportunity to think if there are other materials that could be used, to get serious about circularity? So everything can be seen in two ways. In terms of and actually, this also brings me back to one of the points I was making before, and I think it's very much linked to also what Michal was saying before about the automotive industry. So again, the heterodox economics in innovation has distinguished two patterns, two Schumpeterian patterns, what is called Schumpeterian Mark I and Schumpeterian Mark II. Because Schumpeter at the beginning, when the first study, the first book is about big companies. So that's when he says, oh, the big companies have big labs when they can do incremental innovations. Then when he started to talk about startups and small companies that bring the creative destruction, and that would be what we call Schumpeter Mark II. So there are different sectors where the things that happen are very different. It's about mindset, but it's also about types of companies. So it's easier for a startup to destroy the market or a new player to destroy the market than for an incumbent to see the market. Think of IBM and the personal computer. So it's easier when somebody comes from nowhere. In this sense, I think it's also, and that's why also for the automotive industry it's difficult to change, because they have been doing the same forever. And when they introduce a new market, they jeopardize the old market, well, they are jeopardizing their own sales, their own profits, so it doesn't make a lot of sense financially. And this is also why I think indeed creative destruction in the environmental field, it's so possible and so difficult at the same time, because there are some conflicts. And again, if we go back to the Nobel Prize ideas, if you think of the openness to change, is exactly that. When the government is too close to businesses, they have already a certain market and sort of interest groups, then it becomes clear that creative destruction is not going to be happening, simply because you hear too much people that have a stake, that have an interest at stake. When the government can have a healthy relationship with the private sector, then we can be really open to change, and we can be open to see the creative destruction in the environment, not the environment, in green technology, so to say. Framework conditions they are important. It's very difficult to say which one is more important. Sometimes I think there is an overemphasis, especially in Europe, in framework conditions. So we want to get everything right, like certain life choices that you just want to make it when you're ready, and then you're never ready. I think sooner or later we have to do stuff, and then the framework condition will come. That is my perspective. I'm a bit... these framework conditions, sometimes it's easier to fix framework or to talk about framework conditions than to talk about sectors like prioritization, things that are more sensitive.
Thank you, David, and the old new government thing.
Well, I do agree that financial markets are certainly a critical issue for the entrepreneurship and business environment in Europe and in the Czech Republic, and of course the concern of limited or inaccessible funding is out there. I assume that there are several initiatives adopted recently or discussed recently to create a more favorable environment or more favorable conditions for businesses, especially for SMEs and startups, to flourish. And certainly, it's worth mentioning employees' stock ownership plan, quite recently approved. Ongoing work on Startup Act, which is intended, among other, to create a definition of startup, which could also allow for pension funds, for instance, to invest in startups, or creation of special fund backed by government and European money to invest in startups usually in Series A. And at the same time, these plans are to be elaborated by the new government. It's worth mentioning that one of the priorities for the new government, based on economic strategy of ANO, is so-called 28 regime. I don't know if you heard about it, but you know that there are 27 member states out there, and the rules for financial markets and for capital flows are still fragmented. And the idea of 28 regime is to create additional scheme for businesses, including startups and SMEs, to operate to a certain extent independently from their national legislation, and to operate under that 28, we can call it European regime. I assume that you all know US state of Delaware, which is well known and has a really strong reputation as a state to set up a company. Majority of Fortune 500 companies in US are based incorporated in state of Delaware, because they really favorable, friendly, transparent, predictable regime for corporate law. And the idea behind the 28 regime in the European Union is to create something like Delaware has in the US. If that's going to happen or not, that's indeed a different story, because the perspectives of and priorities of member states differ significantly. But at least on the Czech side, it's priority, and it has been discussed a lot within the government and major business associations like Confederation of Industry and Chamber of Commerce. But to a certain extent, it's been happening kind of under the radar.
Great, and wonderfully wraps up the conference, because we've discussed the thing with Monika Ladmanová in the first panel, and from the governance perspective. So thank you for that. And now, 3 reasons to stay in Europe.
Well, actually, about entrepreneurship and my reason, for example, to be more involved in these activities, you're probably not asking the right person, because I'm very risk averse, and maybe that's why I stayed in academia. I don't know yet.
Too naive. Too naive.
But I would say maybe to balance sort of these perspectives, maybe I can also now add some positive, because maybe you heard about Prague 42. We have also members here, and actually this is an initiative from Skoda Auto and many other subjects and companies. And those are actually these activities maybe which I missed earlier. And also what I missed, and I think this is also very crucial, is that, for example, when I did my grammar school, gymnasium school, I did not really learn about all the financial stuff and all those, things about actually how credit works and what to do about it and so on. So I think that there is many things that we can actually improve already from very young age. And maybe if we were more familiar with all the skills that we can now learn, all the sort of creative stuff that we can create on our own, maybe it would be much more helpful for us to get familiar with these really from the early age. I was not in touch with that, so I stay now where I am, and I'm happy.
And at least you will be provided some food, because we can now invite you for a small refreshment paid from the public funds. That's the good thing about working in university, that they feed you from time to time. Thank you very much for the marvelous panel. Even better than expected. Thank you very much, Francesca, David, and Michal. And let's discuss it further. There were some other interestees in questioning, which I saw but could not place a microphone to them, so let's do it in the foyer. Thank you very much for being here with us. There will be stream available, so you can digest better what was said, because really, this was a wonderful panel indeed. Thank you very much again. Thank you.